Hello everybody, my name is Chris and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to cover all things flashlights, whether that be handheld or weapon mounted lights. We're going to talk about the pros and cons for each and use a little bit of shooting in this video to show different techniques and how to use them effectively in whatever situation you may find yourself. Overall, flashlights, whether that be handheld or weapon mounted lights, have become very popular in the past few years, and the technology in them has become way better than 5-10 years ago, even farther when you're early GWatt years, early 2000s. We're talking about flashlights with just a couple hundred lumens to now 1,000 is almost standard. We'll talk about all that nomenclature here in a little bit. I just want to cover the pros and cons of a handheld flashlight versus a weapon mounted light, and then we'll talk about some nomenclature, go into shooting techniques, and then I'll kind of give you sort of my thoughts of what I would choose or decide, and then you can go from there and make your own decision. Let's talk about handhelds first. Like I said, technology for handhelds has really increased pretty rapidly in the past few years, and there are some definite pros and there are also some definite cons to them. So let's cover the pros right now. Probably the best thing about a handheld is I can essentially point and illuminate whatever I want without having to point my gun at it. And that might seem silly at the time, but if you talk about home defense situations or something like that, just use this as an example. You know, you hear a bump in the night, you get up, you go. If I have a handheld and I illuminate whatever I'm looking at, not that big of a deal. If a threat arises, I can deal with that as I may. But if it's just my teenage kid sneaking in the house, I don't really want to be pointing a gun at him. So stuff like that is really important. It also is a non-lethal alternative. You're not going to get in trouble for shining a flashlight at someone. So especially with modern lights, the lumen and candela output, like I said, I'll talk about that here in a little bit, is so high it can momentarily stun a lot of people. So you can get that PID or personal identification on whoever you are shining, and it's non-lethal. So you can kind of stun them for a little bit, but you're not going to hurt them and you're not pointing a gun at them. Another pro is the fact that you can use it for other things besides personal safety or security. So if I drop my keys under my car, I can shine and kind of see what I'm looking at. Or, you know, if my dog's running around the yard and it's night and I'm trying to figure out where he is, I can just shine and find him. So stuff like that, just overall everyday use, it's actually a lot more useful than you think. A lot of people think that just using their iPhone or Android camera with a flashlight on there is good. And once you use an actual light made for, you know, daily utility stuff, the difference is night and day. So just keep that in mind. The last and final pro I would say is your ability to use this with a firearm and kind of move that light around. So what I mean by that is if I am holding something or someone, like a doorway or a person, with my handgun and something happens over here, I can kind of turn that light and shine it in a way where I can still see over here while still holding this area with my handgun. You can also use some different techniques, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, to kind of change where it looks like you're shooting from. And what I mean by that is with a weapon mounted light, your light is attached to your gun. So a lot of people are kind of thinking that's exactly where you're gonna be. So God forbid somebody's shooting at you, they're gonna aim at the light. So if your light's over here, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, you can kind of give the illusion that you're 3 or 4 feet to your left or right, when in reality you are not standing there and your arm's just extended or up. So just keep that in mind. The biggest downside and only real downside that I have is essentially you're going to be shooting with one hand when using a handheld. Now there are different techniques, which I'll cover here in a few minutes, but overall, you're going to be shooting with one hand. There are techniques that will help support that hand, but really you're not going to have as good a grip shooting with a handheld as you are with either no flashlight or with a weapon mounted light. Now let's talk about weapon mounted lights. And in reality, it kind of does the exact opposite of whatever a handheld does. So any pros for a handheld is sort of a con for the weapon mounted light, and the biggest con for a handheld is really the pro of a weapon mounted light. So let's cover that real quick. So the biggest pro by far of a weapon mounted light is the ease of use and the ability to shoot much better with a weapon mounted light the vast majority of the time. The reason being is I can still have a good grip and still actuate that flashlight while not having to shoot with one hand like I'm using a weapon mounted light. I still can have a good grip, I still can do everything, and I can still shoot really accurately and well because I don't have to break or change my grip when shooting with a weapon mounted light. The other pro is, like I said, the ease of use. I can still maintain and do whatever I need as I'm shooting or moving around. So I also know that my light is going to be with me wherever I am going. So if I have a handheld, it may fall out of my pocket, I might forget it at home, something like that may happen, but if I have a weapon mounted light, it's going to be with me as long as I have my handgun. Let's cover some of the cons, and essentially the cons are just the pros of the handheld. So the biggest thing I would say is if you just have a weapon mounted light, wherever that flashlight is pointing is where your gun's pointing. So I already gave sort of the description with the handheld, but if I'm pointing at something or using that flashlight for PID or personal identification, if it's somebody or something that I don't or shouldn't be pointing a gun at, that's a problem because I have to point my gun at it in order to use this light. So other than that, I would say that using a weapon mounted light, the cons are you can't really use it for anything else, and in order to use it, you have to point your gun at it. And the pros are it's always with you and it's a lot easier to shoot with. I'm going to cover the different techniques right now. I'm going to start with the weapon mounted light because it's just so much easier and it'll go real quick, and then I'll go into the handheld later on and show the different techniques and kind of give you pros and cons of each of those. So when you're shooting with a weapon mounted light, obviously make and model differ. So some may have constant and momentary, some may only have constant, some may only have momentary. That's kind of up to the different manufacturers, and that's up to you to choose or decide. But in reality, I have found with my Surefire X300 to be very, very easy to use. Essentially, if I push in on the buttons, it actuates the light on a momentary setting, so I just have to hold it with my finger. And then if I roll down with my left hand, so if you can watch that, when I shoot, I will roll down and it will turn on the light to be constant. And then if I want to turn it back, I will just roll up with my knuckle to turn it off. So essentially when I'm getting ready to shoot, I'll push down and that light's on. And then when I'm done, I will roll back and turn it off. So work with it. This is where dry fire comes into play and just practicing. Also, if you come to our event, Genesis After Dark, you can practice shooting with either a handheld or weapon mounted light, but it will give you a chance to actually use this in real life to get better at it. Other than that, that's kind of it. I can't really give you an in-depth on your weapon mounted light because they do change with each make and model, but play around with it, practice and dry fire, and see what works best for you. But in all reality, you don't really have to break your grip. You can either push it in or push it down and up. Just work and figure out what works best for you. So now we're going to be talking about shooting a handgun with a handheld light. And there are a couple different techniques which I will cover here and kind of give a quick and brief breakdown of the pros and cons, like I said. So the first one is called the Harris method, and essentially what you are going to do, you've probably seen this in video games and in movies, you're going to have your handgun in your dominant hand, you're going to take your non-dominant hand and hold your flashlight in the fist, and you're going to place it under and kind of link your wrist together, and you'll shoot from there. So I can actuate the light and I can see whatever I'm doing. I can still rotate it around too if need be, but I can also shoot my handgun, and essentially my left hand or support hand is in control of the light and is also slightly supporting my dominant hand, but in all reality, I'm just shooting with one hand. The second method is called the FBI method. So what that is kind of what I was talking about, where I'd be shooting with one hand, but I'm holding the flashlight way above my head or out to the side. It kind of differs. I've seen people use different methods for different ways, but you're holding the flashlight out to the side. And going back on what I said a little bit earlier in the video, essentially what I'm trying to do is put that light away from my body so that if somebody was to shoot at me in the dark, they're gonna aim at the light. So if the light's, a couple feet to the side and I'm shooting this way, the goal is that they're gonna hit or at least shoot around the light and not actually at me. Once again, you have the benefit of hopefully somebody shooting at a light that's not your torso, but the con is I'm shooting strictly with one hand. The next method is called either the chin or the temple index. I've seen it called a couple different things. Essentially what you're doing is you're holding the flashlight at the side of your head and then actually pointing the handgun and shooting. Now there are some definite pros to this, especially if you are using iron sights, because you can illuminate your iron sights a lot easier than almost any other method. So you can really get better shots with the either chin or temple. I've seen both. It doesn't make a difference. Once again, play around with it. Downside, obviously, you are shooting with one hand. The last technique is called the Rogers technique, and this is a little bit tricky to kind of show or describe. It's also dependent on your flashlight and the ability to do this. Now, a lot of flashlights need something like a Thorin or some sort of ring. I've also seen some people tape some paracord around there to make sort of a loop. And essentially what you are going to do is, in some fashion, the easiest way that I have found to do this, I know that there are differing opinions online, is if you have a ring, you're going to use your knuckle to actuate the light. And then essentially you're going to hold the pistol with your support hand like that, and then you're going to just push the light with your knuckle. It's a little finicky, it takes a lot of practice. It does work over time. If you have Surefire or other lights, I've seen Surefire usually has the best because the button sticks out a little bit more, where like on the mod light, I don't know if you can see that, it sticks out ever so slightly, so it's a lot harder to use. But some of the Surefire lights, you can push on the back of them with kind of the meaty part of your thumb. So if I did that, I can actuate it and kind of support my pistol a little bit more. It just gets finicky and you really need to practice using your different fingers. So the con is it's a little wonky unless you practice it a lot, but the benefit is I have at least some sort of support with my non-dominant hand. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about nomenclature and some makes, models, and things I would look for when looking for a flashlight. You are going to hear two terms all the time. You've got lumens and you've got candela. And so lumens essentially is the total volume of light that is coming out, and candela is how far that light is getting thrown. So to put it in a little bit simpler terms and kind of help you think about it, think of lumens and candela in the sense of water. So lumens is the total volume of light. An example of that would be, this is not 1-to-1 scale, this is just to help you kind of think about it. 500 lumens is like a gallon of water. 1,000 lumens is like 2 gallons of water. So you have more water or more light when you have higher lumens. Now candela is how far that water can go, or how far the light can go rather, but in the example, water. So if I have, something with a lower candela, maybe just a few thousand, it's as if I'm just pouring the water jug out. If I have a candela that is a lot higher, like 50, 60, 70, 80,000 or more, think of it like putting it in a hose and shooting it out, okay? So just because something has a little bit lower lumens doesn't mean that it's not a good or effective flashlight. So I can have something with lower lumens but higher candela, and it will look like more light because it can throw that light farther. All right, so overall, the average right now is somewhere around 1,000 lumens, and candela depends a little bit on make and model, although the vast majority are somewhere between 30 to about 70,000 candela is what I would recommend, and those are really good lights. As for make, model, and manufacturer, I would recommend you getting a high quality light. The reason for that is kind of twofold. One, warranty, but two, especially for weapon mounted lights, if you are going to use this on a firearm, it needs to be able to hold up to recoil and the blast of the muzzle. So if you get a really cheap, skimpy light, it could break or will break very quickly. If you get a good quality one, it will last for a very long time. A couple different manufacturers that I would recommend are essentially the big ones. So if you are kind of on a budget, you don't want to spend that much money, I would definitely recommend Streamlight. You can get a couple of these for $100 to $150 for handhelds and both weapon mounted lights. It will benefit you in the long run, I promise. I understand can still be a lot of money for people, but don't skimp out on your lights. It is a life-saving tool and it needs to be able to stand up to the recoil. The other types that I would recommend are Surefire and Mod Light, especially for weapon mounted lights and handheld. You can't really beat them. There are a couple different makes and manufacturers that I'll recommend with the rifle lights, but for handhelds or pistol weapon mounted lights, I would 100% recommend Surefire and Mod Light. These are a little bit more expensive, in the $200, $300, $400 range, can even be more if you're gonna really do a whole bunch of crazy stuff, but they are worth it. These are things that will last you a very long time and can withstand and hold up to the recoil. Plus their total lumen and candela output is bar none much higher than anywhere else. So just keep that in mind. There is give and take. You are obviously going to get more and better performance with the more money you spend up into a certain point. but I understand not everybody has $300 or $350 to drop on a light. It can be a little excessive. I hope all of that helps. Please remember that every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. we hold Genesis After Dark. You can use these skills. I also bring all of my stuff. That way, if you guys want to practice or use any of these or have questions on something, I am there. I'll be more than willing to help you. But I hope this video helped you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. Remember to like and subscribe, comment down below. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.